23.53 single, 23.37 average of 5, 25 second average of 12. You can see that my times have slowly been decreasing. And then if you look at my stats, my best time, I actually got a 17-second single. This was a full step. It just flowed really well. Almost sub 20 average of 5, 23-second average of 12, and then my average of 100 is around 26 seconds right now, which is a lot better than my very first video in episode 1, where I think it was like a 54-second solve.
Hey guys, it's me, cyoubx. Welcome to Roux Hard Mode, episode 2. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what Roux Hard Mode is or what I'm doing, it's basically a series where I learn Roux, except with a lot of constraints. So I'm not allowed to look up algorithms, I don't get to look up video tutorials of any sort, and on top of that, I have to use this GAN-RS, which is floppy, to say the least. I'm disallowing myself from solving using any other method except for Roux until I get a sub 20 average of 12. And that's basically what the series is documenting my progress, seeing what I've learned intuitively over the course of however many weeks this will take. A very common question that I got in the previous episode was basically, why am I doing this? And sort of what was the purpose of having all these constraints? The constraint on the cube is basically just a joke. It doesn't really matter. But the reason that I'm limiting myself from looking up algorithms and video tutorials is because I want to actually force myself to think more intuitively about how to solve the cube in general. One issue that I've found for me when doing CFOP is that my F2L solutions are very formulaic, and basically I see a case and I execute an alg. So at this point I've just sort of stopped thinking about what I'm actually doing, and I'm just basically practicing the same muscle memory over and over again, and I think that's very limiting. By me trying to solve Roux intuitively and trying to do, for example, block building, I'm hoping that some of those skills will transfer when I go back to CFOP, and I will be able to do, for example, X crosses more efficiently. In the first episode, there were a lot of inefficiencies in my solve, obviously, but as is common with anyone who's trying to learn to solve the cube, as you just do it more and more, things become more familiar. So for me, the first step was actually just remembering what all the steps in Roux are. For example, I kept getting confused between doing CMLL and edge orientation, mostly because I'm doing two-look CMLL, and so usually what I'll do is I'll orient the corners and then I'll skip to edge orientation instead of actually finishing the corner permutation first. But other than actually remembering the steps, I made a lot of progress in each of the individual steps, optimizing my solutions, coming up with new algorithms that I think must be move optimal, and I would assume they are the ones that Roux users actually use. I've also done a few hacky things here and there. I'm not sure if those things are typical of Roux solves, but I find that they're really helpful. So I'm going to keep doing them, but you can let me know in the comments if that's explicitly prohibited. Anyway, let's jump right into it. Hope you guys enjoy the video. All right, so the first thing that I figured out how to do a little bit better than before was block building. So one thing that I really didn't want to do in this series was basically revert back to CFOP methods for doing a lot of the block building steps. And I've gotten a lot better at actually finding, for example, cases like this where there's already a corner and edge paired together, and then actually forming a 2x2 block that way. So for example, something like this is very easy to do. And the other thing that I've noticed with this kind of block building is that it's actually very easy for me to inspect compared to with CFOP. I feel like with CFOP, I can track 4 cross pieces and that's about it. With Roux, it's not uncommon for me to be able to actually plan the entire first block and look ahead into the second block. So for whatever reason, the inspection for me for Roux is actually more intuitive. I think part of that is because there's so few constraints on how you hold the cube and what the orientation of the cube should be when you start. There's actually just more creativity that's allowed and more options available, and you can do a lot of things with fewer moves. One thing that wasn't really that hard for me to transition into was using the M-slice to do a lot of the pairing. For example, like this, to pair that. And the reason for that is because in the past when I was doing CFOP, I was already using a lot of wide moves and M-slices to do rotationless inserts. So this was sort of just a natural transition for me, and I didn't really find that too difficult. One thing that I did struggle with a lot in the first day was edge orientation. So for example, something like this is very clearly inserted here, but then there are some cases where, especially if the corner piece is facing up, I'm not really sure if I should tilt this way or this way, especially for the first block. For the second block, it's relatively easy because I already know that this is going to be red, so I know that this has to be turned away. But without this first block here, or if I'm doing this for the first block, sometimes I would mess up the edge orientation. I think maybe the hardest F2L case for me, at least initially, was this case, especially if I'm inserting in the back slot, because this case normally with F2L you would do maybe a cube rotation to pair this up. Here that's not really an option. And the other thing is, because I'm so used to CFOP, I'm used to actually hiding the corner piece and then permuting the edge piece to pair. But in this case, since the edge piece is on the M layer, I actually want to hide the edge piece and permute the corner piece in order to make a pair. And then I still have to do a wide insert. I don't know why I did the last move, bad habit. Yeah, so overall with block building, I'm quite pleased with my progress. I think that overall it's getting more and more efficient as I keep trying. But there's still a lot of inefficiencies, I think, especially with the second block, because I'm doing the second block sort of like CFOP, whereas the first block I'm doing very, very sort of free flowy and very intuitively, which I want to be able to do more with the second block, but I haven't really figured out really good ways of doing that yet. For CMLL, as a little bit of background, I used to know CLL for 2x2, but I no longer know that. I think from all those algs, I think it's like 42 algs or something, I think I remember like 10. And those 10 cases do occur a lot for CMLL in Roux as well, which is really helpful. But in general, if I don't know the case, for example, I don't know how to do the soon case, I have one of two options that I've been trying. One is I could just do the soon and then do either a J-perm or Y-perm. Or alternatively, there have been specific cases where actually I've been doing an OLL instead. And the reason that I think that that's nice is because I can get the corner orientation in one alg, and then I can start doing the edge orientation in the same alg, and that's going to save me quite a bit of time. So instead of doing cyoubx CMLL, I'm essentially doing OLL and PLL, and in some cases that's a lot faster. So for example, with a case like this, where you would think that it's a soon case, it's very easy for me to recognize that this is actually a fat soon, just because there's two yellows here and two yellows here, or these could be white and yellow, it doesn't matter, it's very easy to recognize. So in this case, I would actually do a fat soon, and you can see that I still have to do CMLL, because now I have a J-perm case, but my edge orientation is already complete. So after I do the J-perm, I actually skip EO, because I've already done the OLL. There are also cases where it's not that useful to do. For example, in this case, I can recognize that it's just this fat P, so I know this is a 6 mover. However, if I do the OLL, it's true that I get the corners oriented, and in this case, it's permuted as well. However, I don't actually skip EO because these two are still unsolved. And actually, this is not such a great case. I would have to do something like that. So in general, I think I'm trying to do cyoubx CMLL, but when the situation presents itself where the bottom is already oriented, I can do an OLL instead, and that essentially saves me half a step. So I think edge orientation is actually where I've shaved off the most time and where I've made the most progress. So when I first started doing Roux on day 1, I was effectively just doing OLLs. So for example, in this case, I would just do the OLL, and then I would look at the bottom and do the corresponding OLL. And it's okay. I know those OLLs well enough that it's not too slow, but I feel like that's not really in the spirit of Roux. So I think I actually figured out how to do every single edge orientation case. I think the first thing that I really figured out was this case, where there's 4 misoriented. And when it's in the front like this, I can just do like that. And then if it's in the back like this, I can go like this. So the way I figured it out was actually from this OLL. So usually when you do this OLL, you do something like this, and then you do a U2, and then you repeat. But one thing I noticed was that because it's repeated with a U2 in the middle, when I saw the U2, I saw that it was actually just setting up this case where it's trying to orient 4 edges. And that's what that does. This is just the mirror case, so it was easy enough for me to figure out that I could do this. But then the next thing I figured out was that I don't actually have to mirror the M slice because I don't care about what's yellow and what's white. So it didn't really matter if I did an M or M prime. So basically with this single OLL, I figured out how to do all of the edge orientation cases. So for example, if it is this case, I believe the move optimal way is to actually just do the OLL. The next thing I figured out was actually this case. So the first part of it was to just do this 3 mover, which sets up this case. But this case begins with the same 2 moves that I ended with, except in reverse, which means that I can actually do a 2 move cancellation. So I figured out that actually when I have the case where I have to orient all 4 of these edges, I can actually just do 1 move, 1 slice move, and then do a different alg. So I can do this, U2, and now I set up this 4 edge case, which I can solve like that. This is probably my least favorite case. The OLL for this is very easy, but the way that I would do it in the spirit of Roux is something like this. and that's pretty fast. And then, of course, there are cases where the edge orientation for the bottom and top need to be done. But in this case, as you can see, it's actually just 4 edges that need to be oriented. And we already have an alg for the 4 mover. So if I just do something like this, for example, I have 3 on top, and now I have 1 on the bottom layer that needs to be oriented, and it's the same alg. And then lastly, if all of them are misoriented, so 6 edges need to be oriented, I know that I can do this alg, and that's going to orient 4 of them, which means that I only have these 2 left. So this one I'm not sure if is move optimal. I feel like it probably isn't. There's probably a faster way to do it. But honestly, it occurs so rarely that it just hasn't really been a priority for me to optimize. And then finally, we have the last 6 edges, which is a very intuitive step, but I was doing very suboptimally. And I ended up doing a lot of things that were cool that I just didn't realize. So for example, it wasn't really that rare for me to get a situation where I ended with a U-perm. And to do Roux, you want to solve the upper left and the upper right edge pieces first, so that effectively you get these completely solved, and then you just have the last 4 edges to solve. It felt weird because what I really wanted to do was just a U-perm to solve everything, but I felt like that was cheating, so I sort of limited myself to not doing that. But then after like 100 solves, I realized that I was already doing U-perms every single solve. I was just doing them with the M-slice, which I know exists. I know that there's a U-perm with an M-slice, but it was just never anything that I had learned. But it's kind of cool because I think I found the optimal solution using the M-slice to do a U-perm, which I know for a lot of people, especially blind solvers, is trivial. But for me, it was really cool. So the way that I was solving it initially was I was very strict in finding just the left up edge and the right up edge. So for example, I was looking for essentially the yellow and red, and then the yellow and orange. So for example, the yellow and orange is already solved, or sorry, the yellow and red is already solved, and the yellow and orange is here. And the way that I was doing it was I was basically cycling them. So I would throw this to the opposite side by doing an M2, U2, M2. So you can see now they're opposite. And then I would find the corresponding edge piece that's supposed to go here, hide it in the back, and then basically permute it to here by doing a 3 cycle like this. And you can see now that they're completely solved. But one thing that I realized was that that was actually kind of inefficient, because one thing that I could do is just find any situation where I have headlights in an opposite edge. So for example, here, and this edge doesn't correspond to the left side or the right side, but it is the same case that I want. And I already know that the edge is back here. So in this case, I could do the same thing and have these solved. And then I just choose one to be the left and one to be the right. And I just know that at the end I have some AUF. So in this case, it's very easy. So going back to the U-perm, it's sort of the same thing. So in this case, I have this, which is an opposite edge to corresponding headlights. And this is the edge that I want to fill here. So I can first hide this in the back by doing an M2. And I put this in the front, hide it, bring this forward and restore, and then just finish everything else off. So for me, I will say that that alg is slower than me just doing the 2-gen U-perm. So if I do end up with just a pure U-perm on the top and the bottom is already completely solved, I will sometimes just resort to my 2-gen U-perm just because it's a little bit faster. But now at least I know how to do the U-perm using the M-slice. And then lastly, for the last 6 edges, I basically figured out, in general, it's a lot of 3 cycles. So something like this is very straightforward because I know that I want to put the white piece down here. So I can do a 3 cycle like this, and that'll solve everything. There are also very obvious cases such as this, where things are just opposite. So I know that I can do something like that, and that'll solve it. Then there's a very similar case which tripped me up at first, which is that this needs to go down here, and this needs to go down there. So they're not opposites, but I can do this. And at first what I was doing was restoring and then doing this. But then I realized that I could actually do a move cancellation like this. And then finally, I've gotten this case quite a few times now. I knew this from a long time ago because I used to do flower patterns on cubes. So I know that I can do something like this. I haven't really figured out how to finger trick it, but honestly, this case hasn't come up that much to where I care about it a lot right now. But I think as I progress, it'll eventually be something that I need to optimize. So in my opinion, I've made a lot of progress solving Roux. Time-wise, for sure, I've dropped from, I think it was like a 50-second average all the way down to, at best, a 20-second average of 5 and a 23-second average of 12. That's not bad for a few days. I will say at this point, I think I've figured out probably 80% of what I will figure out in this entire series, which means that my progress is going to slow down quite a lot. However, I do know that I can shave off at least 5 seconds doing edge orientation and last 6 edges. And my block building, I could probably cut down another 3 seconds. So really, I don't think sub 20 will be a problem. It's just how long is it going to take for me to get there. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification if you haven't already. Until next time, toodles.